This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoy the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Tom Schuler and Daniel Estevez, who both just signed up to support us on Patreon, and to Chip Hauser, who just increased his pledge amount. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so now let's get to our show.
Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 558 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories. Publishers Weekly says, visceral settings and robust characters will have readers marveling at how much Kirtley is able to fit into a limited page count. For SFF fans with no time to sink into a doorstopper, these concentrated doses of genre goodness will hit the spot. And Kirkus Reviews writes, Kirtley employs sharp, concise prose that complements his puckish sense of humor. The author's passionate voice breathes life into this wonderful array of tales. So again, the book is called Save Me Please and Other Stories, and it's available now on Amazon.com. And today on the show, we'll be discussing Season 1 of the Netflix series Bodies, about 4 detectives in different time periods attempting to solve the same murder. And this will include spoilers for all of Season 1, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by 3 guests. So, first up, we've got Erin Lindsey, making her 37th appearance on the show. She's the author of the Bloodbound series of epic fantasy novels, and the Rose Gallagher series of paranormal historical mystery novels. Her latest Rose Gallagher book, The Silver Shooter, is out now. So, Erin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
The next up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 32nd appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers' Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's been a television writer, producer, and script supervisor for shows such as Late Night with Conan O'Brien, The Chew, and WWE's Monday Night Raw and Friday Night SmackDown, and she's currently a writer for Pixelberry Studios. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Good to be back, Dave.
And also joining us today is Ruairi Carroll, who you may remember from our panels on the Netflix series Dark, back in episodes 294, 372, and 424. He works as a producer with Virgin Media News in Ireland. He started out as a local radio reporter in Dublin, and has spent the past 20 years as a broadcast journalist, covering everything from politics to crime. So, Ruairi, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here, thank you.
Okay, so let's start off with Erin, and have you tell us about your expectations going into Bodies.
Yeah, wow, were they ever wrong? I had seen it sort of kind of up on the banner, you know, when you sign into Netflix, it was pitching it pretty hard, but I didn't really pay any attention at all. And then I was looking for a new workout show, which for me, I approached that like I approach something I'm going to watch on the plane, which is something that's going to be entertaining enough, but, you know, I don't have to pay full attention to, and it's probably not going to be that great. And the only reason I picked it was because the thumbnail that it showed was this thumbnail of this 19th century detective crouched over a body. And my Rose Gallagher series is about 19th century detectives. And so Netflix is I watch a lot of those, and Netflix is regularly pitching them. And I just glanced at the blurb and it said something about Whitechapel. So I went into this fully believing that this was yet another Jack the Ripper, Whitechapel murder kind of thing. I thought it might be a little bit like Ripper Street that the BBC had out a few years ago. And I started watching it and was immediately in what the hell is going on land, which I love. And yeah, then when I realized it had a speculative element, my heart just started pattering because I write speculative 19th century detective fiction, and there's not a lot of that out there that I know of. So to stumble upon that was just, it was such a great find for me.
Yeah, because it starts off in modern times, right? In modern day London. So you were like, where's my Jack the Ripper stuff?
Yeah. I actually hit stop and went back and was like, am I watching the right show?
And
yeah, so it's pretty cool.
And so I don't know how this worked out as a workout show though, because this is not a super.
Oh no, I jumped off that
unplugged
bandwagon straight away. In fact, after the first episode, I enjoyed it so much that I said to my husband, okay, I'll watch it again, and then we can watch the show together going forward, which is what we ended up doing. No, I abandoned the workout show plan straight away.
Yeah. I guess I'll just say too that the reason all three of you are on this panel is because all three of you independently emailed me and told me I had to watch the show. So
I thought I was the only one.
Oh no.
So that's how we ended up with this this panel. So Andrea, what were your expectations going into
Well,
Bodies?
so the last couple of years, I've been really into detective shows and books. So I've been watching pretty much anything that has a detective in it, whether it's modern day or historical. So about June, I pretty much exhausted everything out there. So I was looking for new stuff to watch. And so I did a search, and this came up in a list. This is about June. So it came up a list of upcoming shows on Netflix. And I'm like, oh, a detective show. And then it was like, oh, it's also speculative fiction. I was like, oh my God, this is like hello wheelhouse. So I was anticipating this for months. From June, I've been waiting for it. And so when it first dropped, despite the fact that I'm like drowning in work, I was like, I have to watch it. So I started watching it. And of course, the first night I'm up till about 3 a.m. because I could not stop. And it did not disappoint. It was everything I hoped and thought it would be. And yeah, like I have workout shows too. And this is not one. You have to pay attention, and it is so riveting, and it is so in every facet of the filmmaking is so amazing that it was just I couldn't stop watching it. I binged it in 2 days, which is, considering that I'm working at the same time, is just a little crazy.
Yeah, I watched this whole thing in one day. I mean, and it's sort of I sort of have to psych myself up to watch a new TV show, and so I wasn't necessarily expecting to watch more than one episode, but I just, as soon as I started it, I just couldn't stop. I watched the whole thing just straight through. So Erin and Ruairi were on our 3 Dark panels. So I'm just curious, Andrea, did you ever watch Dark, which bears some similarities to the show?
I did. I also couldn't stop watching that. Although I don't remember when I got to the ending, but I couldn't take it anymore. It was like misery porn at that point. So I still have not seen the ending. Like literally the last 2 episodes I have not seen. I kind of assume everybody dies. Considering everybody dies several times.
Well, we won't give any spoilers for Dark, but yeah, I mean, this is like, I'd be curious to hear what other people think, but this is sort of like a little bit more cheerful, much shorter, a little bit more historical version of Dark. But let's get Ruairi in here as well. So Ruairi, kind of, what were your expectations coming to Bodies?
I didn't really know much about it, but I just started watching because on my Netflix recommendations it came up, probably because of Dark. But for me, the lure, without knowing anything, was Stephen Graham, the actor, and I just love him. And I'd watched he did a movie called Boiling Point, which is this really stressful one-shot film where he's a head chef in a kitchen. So I'd watched some of that, and it's a fantastic watch, but it's really stressful. I think he's incredible. I love him. So I didn't know it was period. I didn't know it was even time travel until I clicked into it. And then, like the others here, hooked. And because I love this kind of stuff, and I'll put my hand up, when it comes to time travel, I'm not the brightest. And I'm sort of, well, wait a minute, if he did that, and would that, so, but it doesn't stop me getting any pleasure out of it. It was the same with Dark. I had such a great time with Dark, and it was lovely to find something like this again. And it was nice to see, as I said, I'd watch Stephen Graham, painting his walls if he was to do it. And there was some of the other casts I didn't know, but I did recognize, and I had his name a second ago, but he was in Andor as well, another show.
The guy who played Hillinghead. Kyle Soller.
Yeah.
Playing almost exactly the same, almost kind of the same character. Like that lawman who's relentless.
Yeah. So I like the look of it. I mean, I think there's parts of it that looks like it was sort of done on a budget, but then oddly there's other parts that look fantastic, because it's set in 4 different time zones: the 1800s, World War II, present day, and then in the future. So, like the others, I was hooked. I didn't binge it like you, Dave, in a night. I do have the luxury of, with my working hours, I can watch stuff in the mornings before I go to work. So it was kind of a morning ritual. I'd bring my kids to school and then have a cup of coffee and catch an episode. So I watched it over the course of about 2 weeks, but loved every minute of it.
It was interesting because just as I was reading up on the show, there was a lot of talk about Stephen Graham being just this legendary actor, and he's absolutely fantastic in this show. I'm a little embarrassed to admit I don't think I've ever seen him in anything before. I wonder if everyone else knows him, or is he more is he better known in the UK or?
I can't remember what I've seen him in. Like, I haven't seen Boiling Point, but I knew who he was.
I knew him from Boardwalk Empire.
Ah, that's it. That must be it.
I think he was in The Irishman. He got his start. I think one of his first big roles was in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Oh, that's it. That must be it too.
He was one of the two kind of geezers, along with what's his name? I can't remember the other actor's name. Anyway, that was the first time I noticed him. But I just think he's fantastic, and he's done a lot of drama series, like on UK television. He did a great one called White House Farm, I think, where he plays another detective investigating a murder. But I just think he's fantastic.
Yeah, I was really, really impressed with him in this. When you say you thought the show was, it looked like it was made on a budget in some parts. Like, what parts did you think looked a little bit?
I thought some of the futuristic stuff was quite good, but then I think if you were kind of to lift the lid a little bit, it looked okay, right? So they're doing the best that they can. Funnily enough, I thought the stuff that looked the best was the 1890 stuff. I thought that was really impressive. Now, I don't know, do they get to use, because there's a lot of period productions, especially over in the UK. So I don't know, do they maybe get to reuse a set somewhere on the BBC?
They did.
Or something?
I noticed it on the second watching, which I binged it all yesterday again because I had watched it in October. I noticed that they used the same set for the 1890s, the 1940s, and I think also for the 2023. It's the same police station.
Yes, I noticed that. All right. Yeah. The same kind of outlay.
Yeah.
Well, the Long Harvest Lane is obviously the same set.
Yes. Yeah. And I also loved that the color, the use of color, like everything had like a blue cast, blue and brown and orange, like everything was cast in blue, and it was just stunningly beautiful, I thought.
Yeah. I thought in terms of the cinematography and everything, it looks really good. But so maybe I should just say what the basic sort of setup is. So we have these 4 time periods that Rory mentioned. And in each one, we follow a different detective who is investigating. There's a body shows up in Whitechapel, which is sort of famously the neighborhood in London where Jack the Ripper operated. So that's where we are. And this naked man, body of a naked man is found in all 4 time periods. And it seems to be the exact same man. There's the same, he looks the same and has the same weird sort of tattoo on his wrist, and all have been shot in one of the eyes. And so obviously we know from this that there's something supernatural or science fictional involved. But so Erin, why don't you tell us what did you think of the detectives? Let's start with, I guess, I don't know if I want to overload too many detectives. Right? Well, how about let's just go for it. Let's just go for it. What did you think of all the detectives? All 4 detectives.
All 4 detectives. I mean, I think they all had their merits and their demerits as human beings and as cops in terms of their various storylines. I think some of the ways in which they were unlikable were some of the most compelling things about them. To me, the most sympathetic of the 4, I really, of course, I don't know if it's just because it's my 19th century bias coming out, but Hillinghad, that storyline was my favorite. He was my favorite detective. He seemed to be the sort of best mix of good intentions and competence and just really trying to do his best. But I thought all 4 of them had compelling storylines in their own way. I think Shahara is the easiest to sort of understand because she's in our timeline, and DS Hassan in the modern timeline, she is kind of, I don't know, I think you understand her motivations and the motions that she's going through very well, and she's kind of a really solid anchor for the series. But, you know, even though I guess the one I connected with least on a human level was Iris Maplewood, the detective in the future timeline. But I think that was by design.
Yeah.
I think, you know, she plays a character who is very alienated in a world of alienated people. And I think we're not really meant to connect with her the same way that the others do. It gives that sense of, it heightens that sense of dystopia in terms of where she is. And so even though she's the detective that pisses you off the most, I think, in terms of the choices she makes, you know, you can understand why they've made those choices. So I think, I mean, everybody seemed to be brilliantly cast. I think they all did a great job.
Yeah.
There's one other detective in the 40s he's a Jewish detective, and he's kind of crooked, but kind of has a heart of gold, sort of. I guess I'll mention, his name is Whiteman or Weissman. I guess I'll mention this is based on a graphic novel by Cy Spencer. I'm going to, and it was, the show was created by Paul Tomlin and written. I'm going to assume nobody is familiar with either of those two.
No.
I was not.
No, I didn't know anything about it. So.
No.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just explain quickly. So Cy Spencer, so the graphic novel is very short. It's like this sort of 8 issue miniseries. I think it was 8. And there's no time travel to speak of. And the body turns out to be this like supernatural being who like kills himself through time in order to impact people's lives. I think it's really, really trippy. It was funny. The editor on the book was this editor Shelley Bond, and she says, Cy Spencer is not as well known as other British comic writers like Neil Gaiman or Grant Morrison, but I always believed he was the William Blake of comics. And so, just to give you an idea of kind of how trippy the graphic novel is. And so it's so Paul Tomlin, he made the story much more conventional. I mean, I think almost entirely in good ways, but it's like he took this like really trippy comic and made it, you know, he tied the storylines together and, you know, make a lot more sense and stuff like that. And Paul Tomlin had worked with Cy Spencer on Torchwood years ago, but they sort of crossed paths but didn't really know each other that well. And unfortunately, Cy Spencer died in the early stages of this TV show. So I think they had just greenlit the pilot script when he died. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to, you know, give a lot of feedback on the show. But the first episode, you'll notice, is dedicated to him.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
But so Erin mentioned there that one of these timelines is in the future. So Andrea, why don't you tell us, what did you think about the future timeline?
Well, I agree that Iris is the most remote, and I think at one point her brother says, "You're the loneliest person I know," and I think we have trouble relating to her because she has trouble relating to other people. She's one of those people who is so sure in her, she can't help asking questions, and she can't help, you know, a bloodhound, which is also how she's described. And she alienates herself from people. And she was the one that was the one question I had was, why does she go ahead and shoot?
Okay,
professor?
we're getting way
sorry. Sorry.
You just jumped
Spoiler
ahead in
alert.
time like 8 episodes right
there. But yeah, she was the one who was.
Did I mention there's a spoiler warning on this episode?
Sorry. Well, there's always spoilers. People, you gotta know what you're getting into.
That's right.
And we all know the ending, but yeah, so she was the one who was the remotest for me. Although the actress is wonderful. I think she's been in a couple of things. I think she's like Israeli? No, or
yeah, she's
Her name
Israeli.
is Shira Haas. I think
Shira Haas. She's been in a couple of shows about Orthodox women.
Unorthodox is fantastic.
Yeah.
Or Unorthodox.
Unorthodox.
Yeah,
that's right.
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's what I haven't seen it, but I know she was in it, and so I thought she was
it's great.
Great. She's also, her accent is slightly different because she's not native British. So again, that's that sense of otherness about her that fits the character.
I guess maybe I should back up a little bit. So Rory, so why don't you tell us about your, just like when you started watching like the first episode or two, kind of what did you think? How did you feel about what was going on? Were you into the show immediately? Did it take you a little while to warm up?
I was because it was the kind of thing once you kind of clocked that there was something amiss with the timelines and everything, I was sort of getting into it, and in terms of the characters, I like the way they kind of jump between each one, and they would show. I think they would use this sort of device of a slate would come up on the screen, and the clock would roll back from 2023 to 1941 or whatever, and it might show the 4 different detectives in the 4 different timelines. So I like the way they did that. Once I kind of was in, and once I think with any show, I think they kind of teach you how to watch it. And
that's true.
You have to sort of, okay, this is how I watch this show, and this is what we're supposed to get. So once I was in on that, I was delighted to go along for the ride, and I did like the 4. I mean, I liked all 4 of the detectives, and I read a recap that made the point that they're all, in a way, they're all kind of a little bit different to everyone else around them. You've got the Muslim woman who's the detective, which is probably, it may not be that commonplace even today. You've got the closeted gay man in 1890 when it was illegal to be gay. You've got the guy in World War II Britain who's Jewish and is facing anti-Semitism, and then you've got the other detective in the future who's got this, which I thought was really cool, her spinal obviously she had a spinal injury that's referred to, we'll get into all that, but that was her difference. Once, as I said, once I was kind of in on it, and once I was, okay, this is how they want me to watch it, I was all in, and then that's when I really kind of just stuck with it for the rest of the show.
Just to pick up on something Rory just said, I think one of the things that struck me as a particularly impressive achievement was that first episode might have felt a little bit disoriented, jumping between the timelines, and the split screens kind of annoyed me at first. But once, as Rory says, you sort of learn how to watch the show. I thought they did actually a brilliant job of what could have been a very disjointed narrative if it wasn't managed well, because they do jump a lot between these different timelines. And one thing that they did that I thought was particularly clever was they don't drop the future timeline into the equation until the very end of the first episode, when you think you've got it figured out. Okay, we've got our Victorian detective, our modern, our Second World War detective, and our modern detective, and we're jumping back and forth between these 3, and you're just starting to feel comfortable, and then right at the very end, it's like, welcome to the future. What? So I thought that was very clever the way they handled it, and it just was just the right amount of discomfort to orient you with what you're going to see without getting me anyway to jump off the bus and say, okay, it's too much.
Yeah, I'll say I wasn't necessarily sold on the first episode. I felt like the current day plot line, I don't know, it just felt a little, I have a big thing about TV cops, and there's just a lot of sort of cliches or whatever of the TV cop genre that sort of irritate me. And I felt like, so what happens basically is that there's this protest going on, this sort of right-wing protest on the streets of London, and this detective, Shahara Hassan, sees a young man holding a gun, and she chases him into an alley where she finds a dead body, and he sort of says that he didn't do it and escapes, and that kind of kicks everything off. But just some of the, I don't know, the fact that she has just a taser apparently and goes chasing after a guy with a gun rather than calling for backup and stuff like that just seemed, I don't know, it seemed sort of TV cop-ish to me.
Well, she does try to call for backup, but the energy the energy burst cuts off communications.
Right. It just
So that's why
seemed very unwise to me to
Well,
chase someone.
do you think that's
gun.
do you think that's an American thing? Because we're we're in the UK and here in Ireland, we have unarmed police forces. So I don't know if that's a thing. I wouldn't think about that now watching that. We're used to seeing police without guns at all in this country.
And they would go chasing after a guy with a gun into an alley like that?
I can't speak for what they would do, but we here in Ireland there are some armed police and we have armed units. But if you're walking down the street and you see a police officer, they're unarmed, and they would be the first to respond to anything that could happen.
And I also think that speaks to the character herself, who she doesn't think about. She's relentless. She doesn't think about the danger. She just goes and does her job.
Also, can I say how great it is that we have, serious debates about whether an individual human cop who's not going to be like, every person is different, whether they would or wouldn't make that decision. And the conversation Dave and I had offline yesterday about people's ages, we're going to hotly debate the plausibility of that, but we're fine with the time travel.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just saying that was. It sounds like nobody else had issues. Everyone was like 100% on board from the first episode.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Well, that's what I think about. That's what I feel like. That's why I stayed up till 3 a.m. watching it, because every episode has this amazing hook at the end that you're just like, I can't stop. I have to move on to the next one. I have to find out what happens. And right from the start, it was like, oh, there's that hook of now we're in the future and the same thing. So
yeah. And I wouldn't say that I was on board from the minute of hitting play. I think, as I mentioned, I had a couple of frustrations at the beginning of the episode. I didn't really like the jumping around. I was keen on the time travel aspect in general, but I thought there was too much cutting between scenes. And I was thinking, I would appreciate like an episode of Whiteman and an episode of Hassan, and then not jumping back and forth that much. But that's why I say I think they were clever about it, because they did a good job of bringing us up to speed in a relatively economical way. And by saving that future timeline until the very end, it was the extra kick that I needed to proceed to the next episode.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But so what happens basically is that these 4 detectives are all pursuing these cases, and people around them are saying cryptically, "No, you are loved." And so you kind of like get a sense that these cases are all connected somehow, and that, these people who are saying, "No, you are loved," are, connected somehow. And then for me, where I was really 100% on board with the show was in, I forget, maybe the 2nd or 3rd episode, where in the future timeline, the detective is sort of like driving her car or something, and we see a skyscraper in the background, and the letters KYAL are emblazoned on the building, and the letters form "No, you are loved." And so we see, like, that I just got chills from that. And so we know somehow that this future society is all built around this idea that we've been hearing about from these different characters throughout the different timelines. So
I don't want to get my hand slapped again, but the 8th episode, the ending of the last episode, something about that happens again. So, but I won't say it. I won't spoil anything.
No, you don't want to get in the bad books.
No,
Yeah.
Dave is constantly slapping my hand about.
Yeah.
Forward.
It's not just you. Everyone always wants to talk about the ending right out of the gate, but I enforce discipline.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, this is, since there's the 4 different timelines and stuff, I think it is going to be kind of complicated to try to, describe every twist and turn of the plot and everything. But at a very sort of, high level, basically we find out that there's this teenage boy named Elias Mannix, and he's the center of this conspiracy to eventually detonate some sort of super bomb in London. And once this bomb goes off, it's going to kill hundreds of thousands of people and cause a collapse of civil order, which is going to pave the way for this cult, the Know You Are Loved cult, to seize power and kind of remake the country in its own image. Is there anything else anyone wants to mention that's like a huge plot thing in the middle? It's really complicated.
Well, I don't know how far we're... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I guess a huge plot thing is the method by which they go about this. And I guess that's the one element that ties the four storylines together is the one, or depending on if you count the body, two characters who appear in all four timelines. And the way that they go about this is both the most interesting aspect of the show and also potentially, for me anyways, the most problematic in the sense of I'm still not sure I fully understand it. I'm being kind of deliberately vague because I'm waiting for Dave to admonish me.
No. Just go. Go ahead. Talk about the characters who appear in multiple timelines.
Well, the first and most obvious one, which I was dense enough not to realize straight away, I knew that the four bodies that the detectives had found had all been found in the same condition, i.e., naked, missing an eye, and with a strange symbol on their wrists. That last one I still don't get. But anyway, but they are found face down. And so it wasn't until my husband pointed it out to me in I think episode 3, I'm embarrassed to admit, that I realized this isn't just the same type of murder. It's literally the same body. It's the same person. So that's the one character that appears in all the timelines. And then the other is Elias Mannix, aka Julian Harker, who is, we first meet him as a teenager. Mm-hmm. I'm not actually sure about that. I would have to see it again, but I think we first meet him as a teenager in the modern timeline. We are introduced to him as a few episodes in the Victorian timeline as a wealthy, he becomes a banker, but he's basically sort of a wealthy London aristocrat in 19th century London. And then he also eventually shows up in the future timeline as the commander-in-chief of the cult that's in charge. He's basically the guy who's in charge of modern, future Britain. And his method of achieving that is to detonate this explosion at the age of 15, which shakes up the order in such a way that he can assume power. He does that by traveling back in time to assume the identity of someone in the 19th century. So basically that's the mechanism. Is the whole chicken and egg thing is where I start to get confused here. But if we start with the egg being Elias Mannix, the dictator, he goes back in time through a time travel device in the future, arrives in 1890, assumes the identity of a dead aristocrat, and then uses that, both a combination of his knowledge of the future and just his inherent position of privilege, to start this sort of nascent cult, which then gets more and more powerful over the generations. But where I get really confused is that he ends up being his own ancestor. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I don't know who wants to take over here.
Well, there's some stuff you're just going to have to go with here, like with a lot of time travel stories. And so this is a classic. Yeah. It's called a bootstrap paradox story, named for the Robert Heinlein story By His Bootstraps, in which, like Erin's saying, it's sort of this chicken and egg kind of thing where, the things that happened in the past were created by people traveling back in time. And so the things in the past wouldn't have happened without the people in the future, and the things in the future wouldn't have happened without the people in the past. So there's no there's nowhere you can point to where things started. So
they frequently call it the loop, breaking the loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're kind of just going to have to go with it, like in any bootstrap paradox story, that all makes sense.
Sure, but there's two parts to that, Dave, if I may. One is the bootstrap loop, which I agree. You just have to, as with all time travel things, you just have to kind of hand wave away. But the other is that even if you assume that future Mannix has to go back into the past and assume the identity of a powerful person so he can start his little project, why does he have to be his own ancestor? Doesn't that actually make it more complicated?
I mean, I don't think he would have to be. I think the writers just thought that was cool, or I don't know.
This is where my head starts to hurt.
Yeah,
now.
exactly.
And as I think you mentioned hand waving. There's a lot of, and I was watching Seinfeld, and they were talking about yada yada. There's a lot of yada yada science.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yada yada, yada yada time travel.
Yeah.
Yada yada. There's a lot of
It's
yada
true.
yada-ing, like yada yada. He becomes the dictator of a future. Like it's like
yada yada quantum physics.
yeah, and that was one of the things that kind of jumped out about me. Okay, so look, there's a few questions I have, about this. I don't know how.
Well, I watched the show twice, so I'm here to answer all your questions.
Okay, so the whole thing is that he goes back in time to set up this cult. Stephen Graham's character goes back in time to set up this cult. He meets what's his name, Hillingworth,
Hillinghead.
Hillinghead. He meets Hillinghead's. He meets Hillinghead. He becomes involved with his daughter, who's quite old looking. That was another thing.
Extremely old to still
Hillinghead,
be a maiden.
Hillinghead, I would say, was about 40, and he apparently has a daughter who's 28. So he goes back in time. He does like a Summersby on it. He takes over the identity of a missing soldier. He gets in with this elderly woman and takes over the estate. Now, I have a few things about time travel. First of all, I can barely remember what I did last week, and to think that you'd be able to go back in time and somehow memorize stock markets and everything from 1890 to make you into that era's, I don't know, Elon Musk. First of all, I don't know how anyone does that. I mean, if you sent me back to 2001 and I knew all about Facebook or Google, I probably still wouldn't know how to invest in those companies.
Well, okay. Wait,
how long did you have to study?
Yeah, well, because actually in the scene where they go to the camper van in the campgrounds, there's a record playing, and it's all like stock market stuff from 1890. So presumably Elias Mannix has had 30 years or so, 25 years to memorize all those records.
Yeah. So I'm going to keep yada yadaing here. There's the question. There's the question. So then, okay, so he meets, I think her name is Polly. He starts his family, which eventually, as you said, he becomes his own ancestor. And a few generations down is where we meet teenage Elias. There's all the stuff about the bomb that is he sets up a bank. There's a bomb in a vault in the bank that the detective Shahara finds. That's the bomb that is detonated, creating this obviously massive event that leads to the downfall of UK society and allows this new government headed by Elias Mannix to grow and form with his cult and everything. Again, that's kind of waved away, how a teenage boy in the aftermath of a cataclysmic event takes over. I guess maybe the suggestion is that this cult was in every level of society. Perhaps that's what helped him. I'm guessing like that. But the big question around the bomb. So there's this bomb that's in a vault in a bank that dates from 1940. Did I miss something? Was the bomb placed there back then?
Yeah, it was. He left it to Shahara in 1941. That's what he says when they go to the bank. He's like, this vault has been in your name since 1941.
So he created a nuclear bomb before
was it a
anyone else.
nuclear bomb? Did they ever say nuclear bomb?
No, it must have been.
It killed 500,000 people. Yeah,
it must have been something.
A mushroom cloud.
It either must have been a nuclear bomb or something, even like some new technology that they invented or something. I mean, this is a world with time travel, so maybe they were able to come up with something even more.
I'm going to cut them some slack, Yeah. But it's not with the time travel device. It's not like and it becomes relevant later on. He can't bring anything back. So you go in, and it's like, I guess, in Terminator, where you go through and you come out naked.
Yeah.
So you can't bring anything with you. You can't bring any references.
Do you have your dental fillings?
That's a good one.
That's a good thought. Because the bullet didn't go back. That's the reason there's no bullet, because it wouldn't go back in time. Right. So
but you do come out with a cool new tat on your wrist.
Well, I'll give it to them that somebody from the year 2053 who maybe knows about advanced bomb technology that we don't have could have gone back in time and started this cult, which eventually infiltrates all levels of society, and they could have built some super advanced bomb that couldn't normally have been built in 1941. I'll give them all that.
I think it's actually probably just really a lot more simple in my head anyway. It's they've had this vault since 1941, but that doesn't mean it's been sealed since 1941. And if the cult is as pervasive as all that, that looked like a 50s, 60s era nuclear device to me. Not that I'm an expert, but it looked, let me put it this way. It looked like that's what they looked like in the movies.
Yeah.
A 50s, 60s era nuclear device. And so I don't have too much trouble imagining that the bomb was either constructed in that vault during a period where, because it's Harker's own bank. It's Elias Mannix's family's bank. They could have just closed it down and moved in whatever they needed to move in and do whatever they needed to do. So I don't think we necessarily need to assume that the bomb has been there since 1941.
Yeah. So is the secret to a show like this to just go with it then? And don't think too much.
Yeah.
I think so, Rory. Yeah. And this is what I really actually loved about this show. And, you know, I have complained often my beef with science fiction in particular, but sometimes also fantasy, is they get so obsessed with the world building and the sort of details of the macro plot that characters become almost an afterthought. And there's no real humanity or pathos to them. And those stories tend not to appeal to me, no matter how shiny your story is and how beautiful your world is. If there are no characters to connect to and the micro stories happening within that aren't compelling, then I don't really care. And this is kind of the opposite of that. It's all of that stuff is just scaffolding. And I really love that about it. It's there enough to intrigue and to direct, but ultimately this is 4 separate stories about 4 different people that are all interesting in their own right. And that's kind of what I connect to personally.
Yeah. I as a writer myself, I have especially on a first draft, I have a tendency to over-explain. Like, I have to explain this. And then like second draft, I'm like, yeah, I don't need any of that. People get it. People will get it. And if they don't, then it's not for them. So this doesn't treat us like idiots and have to over-explain everything. And I appreciate that just as a viewer.
Yeah, no, I think it works really well emotionally. I was interested in all the characters. I thought like dramatically it works really well throughout. I mean, I did have this like long list of logical questions I have. Actually on a second watch, it actually sort of semi-addressed a lot of them. I mean, a lot of the, you're like, why didn't they do this? Why didn't they do that? And then, at some point a character will say like, oh, we just can't do that. We tried and it didn't work. And it's like, doesn't really logically make sense why they could, why. But, since they addressed it, I'm willing to give them sort of half credit for all that stuff that like they anticipated all the objections and had a character say, we can't do that.
Yeah. That's the hand waving part.
Yeah. It's very hand wavy, but,
I think there is a scene where they basically say, when they're talking about the time travel, I think a character says they don't really understand it themselves.
Yeah. That always works.
Yeah.
It's every time travel show has one of those, right?
Because I also think everybody watching is like, yeah, I don't understand it either.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not worth scratching beneath that surface because it's not going to be very satisfying, right? But I was curious what others thought. I have a real fondness for the limited series in general. That being said, I felt like this could have used one more. Not because any particular... One more episode, because I just felt some plot points were just a little bit rushed. I really liked the love story in the Victorian timeline, but it felt rushed. It felt like we skipped some really important moments. And so understanding in particular why the photographer who becomes Hillinghead's lover, why he sticks with him in the beginning when he is such a dick and he has no reason, particularly this photographer. It wasn't clear to me what stake he had, what skin he had in the game that would have him put up with some of the ways that he was treated at the beginning. And then he's just always willing to be there as Hillinghead's lover, even when the detective doesn't deserve it at all. So I would have liked a little bit more there. I would have liked to understand Whiteman a little bit better. He's, as I think Rory said, or maybe Andrea, I can't remember, all 4 of our detectives are outsiders in some way. And he's got a double dose of it because not only is he Jewish during the Second World War, he's also German. So he's just not an appreciated person on either side of the conflict and is very much maligned on both counts in the UK. And so you can sort of understand I would just like to understand his motivations a little bit more. What made him tick? Why is he corrupt? They're like something, yada, yada, gambling debts. But I would have liked to know a little bit more about him, because I found his storyline with Esther to be really compelling.
Yeah, I loved that.
And so these are just some examples where it's nothing big on any particular, but it's just a little extra each time that I think would have, letting it breathe a little bit more would have been nice.
Yeah, I could go with that. I mean, the structure of this is really interesting because the first 6, there's 8 episodes, and the first 6 are basically sort of what you expect. It's sort of like the 12 Monkeys thing where the characters try to, avert the disaster, but find that they can't because it was all predetermined, and everything that they do is what happened before, and so the disaster unfolds, and that's sort of like the climax. And so it kind of feels like it might end there, like dramatically, and then you're like, wait, there's still 2 more episodes, so what's going to happen? And then there's these two additional episodes where it's like, oh wait, now actually we can go back and change the past and fix things. And so that's what happens in the last 2 episodes. But the I guess it's episode 7. It's really interesting because it's basically the story of Elias Mannix's life in the 1890s.
Yeah. It was a good episode.
Yeah.
And then again, like a second time once things have been changed. And it's like, just structurally, it was really, really unique. And I can't think of another, time travel story that had like that whole, that covered such a big span of time in one episode over 2 different lifetimes. It was, I thought it was really cool.
I think getting back to what was missing, it made me think as well, a part of me, because I do love this kind of stuff, I'm a sucker for the aftermath of the explosion. I would have loved it to see, I don't know, maybe some mocked up news footage of a blast site and a rising death toll counter or something like that, and maybe a little bit of, this somehow how we're shown the rise of this alternative government. Maybe were there troops on the streets? Was there martial law? I would have liked to have seen something like that, but it worked perfectly without it. The blanks were filled in, and we could fill them in ourselves. But that's just me. That's the kind of thing I like.
Well, no,
I agree. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was definitely, that was one of the big questions I had the first time I watched it, was like, how does this kid who set off this bomb, and it seems like lots of people know that he did it, how does he become the beloved commander? And I can sort of accept that the cult had such influence. They mentioned something about like that the government lied and suppressed the truth and stuff like that. But if we just saw that happen a little bit on stage, that might have helped that. But Erin, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think one of the things that they did well is they give him adequate time. He doesn't set off this bomb when he's 25 and become the supreme leader, or set off this bomb when he's 35 and become the supreme leader. He's only 15. And I think my assumption anyway is that he doesn't accede to power for another decade plus, because the world has to have time to truly crumble after this cataclysmic event. It takes time for institutions to disappear. It takes time for anger to build at the disorder that prevails, and so on and so forth. But I agree, we would have just a few glimpses. It could have even been something like, for example, there's a period of time where Maplewood's walking around university looking for the professor. This is a great moment to have some history class that she walks into, and they're, watching a film or a clip that gives you just a little bit even of a flavor of what that mechanism looked like. I agree, Rory, you don't need it, but I do think it would have been nice to see.
Because there is a reference to it. I think her next door neighbor, Maplewood's neighbor, comes up. They have a glass of wine, and they're watching some sort of whatever it is, 30 years since the event or whatever memorial program.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I have it's not an issue. It's just a question that popped up in my mind as I'm watching is 30 years isn't quite enough to rebuild to that extent. From an explosion that large that killed 500,000 people. It just doesn't seem quite logical to me, especially advances in technology that they made. Just, like being in New York during 9/11, and that wasn't even as bad as this supposed explosion. It took at least, 10, 15 years before they rebuilt.
But if you think of like Berlin in World War II, or
I was going to just say in Japan.
I feel like by
yeah.
the 70s, like the 70s, like all that stuff, you wouldn't even know. Like,
it just doesn't seem, personally to me, it didn't seem right. Like the whole sections of London was basically destroyed. Like not just to the bedrock, I would assume. Like just rebuilding all of that in 30 years. And the only thing they show is like one spot that's with a fence with, memorials, and it just didn't, I don't know. It struck me as a little not quite enough time.
That one I didn't have trouble with. They rebuilt a lot of London after the Blitz. A lot of Europe was leveled. And, Polish cities totally leveled, French cities totally leveled. I think that to me, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but the rebuilding in New York City is a very New York City phenomenon for reasons we can discuss offline. Those dudes can't build a subway in less than 20 years. That's a whole other conversation.
Point taken.
I'll say the biggest thing after after I went through it twice and everything and wrote up all my notes, the one thing that I still can't understand at all is why after Elias Mannix goes back in time through the throat, why he doesn't leave guards behind to stop anyone else from going through the throat to undo what his whole plan. I just can't make any sense out of why the throat is just accessible to Shahara and Gabriel.
Professor, yeah.
Totally. And to connect to Andrea's now timely question, why did she shoot?
Yes. I still can't figure it out. I watched it twice now, and I still
she's a very lost puppy.
And then also she shoots him and then immediately regrets it and works with the Chapel Perilous people.
And that's why actually I didn't have as much trouble with that. She makes a lot of decisions that you're mad at her about.
Yeah.
But there's a certain consistency to it where she is so conflicted and she is so brainwashed that I don't have so much trouble believing that just in a moment of extreme stress, it's just an automatic reaction. And like the second she pulls the trigger, she regrets it.
I did think it was
cool. But she is unfathomable in some ways anyway.
I did think it was cool. It was a cool explanation for how you ended up with these bodies strewn across time, that this guy was shot standing at sort of the threshold of this time portal. I thought that was a clever explanation for that.
Did we get any attempt at an explanation of the wrist tat?
No, it just happens when you go through.
I noticed that when they look at the particle thing, that symbol is the center of the particle, that weird tattoo thing.
Yeah, I don't think there's an explanation beyond just the fact that there's like there's the light in the portal somehow brands you as you pass through. I don't know. I don't think there's much beyond that. But I want to get Ruairi back in here too. So Ruairi, do you have any other questions or any other like favorite moments from the show or characters or anything like that?
No, I was surprisingly, I did like the 1940s, the World War II period. And it's weird because it's not really a part of history I'm particularly interested in myself, but I did enjoy it. And I kind of liked the actor, whose name I had it there a second ago. I mean, there were jokes made about him being like a matinee kind of star. Look, he was a good-looking guy, and I think they played into that. So I enjoyed that, and I did enjoy the little aside with the girl that he kind of befriended who came in. There was a great scene where she came into the police station and she blackmailed him, because there's another kind of story about this, about how he framed someone else for a murder to kind of cover up. That's a whole other thing, really. It all relates in. But there was a great scene where she comes in and then she's speaking Yiddish to him, and she's saying one thing and he's telling his colleagues completely different, trying to blackmail him. And I like their relationship. His overall arc was the one I liked the most, I think, because he kind of redeemed himself at the end.
When he had a lot of charisma, and so one of the things we talked about with Dark was how there wasn't really any there weren't really any jokes at all in the entire 3 seasons.
No.
And there was a lot of funny moments, particularly with the Whiteman character. I just wrote down 2 I wanted to mention. So there's a part where the girl he's sheltering, Esther, is in his apartment, and he's made borscht for her. And he says, how is it? And she says, tastes like rat's piss. And he says, that's my secret ingredient. You've got a great palate. And there's a part where
both of them, the patter between them is great.
Yeah, and also there's a part where he's talking to the secretary in the police station, and he says, no, come on, we've got a deal. You keep an eye out for me, and I keep an eye out for me. So, yeah, so there was some levity in there as compared to
I would
Dark.
be curious whether anybody out there in the internet universe has run some data on who got the most screen time and how that split out. I would be curious simply how much it matches my own anecdotal impression of it, because I felt like Whiteman got the least, but is it because he objectively did get the least, or because I just wanted to see more of him? I don't know.
It felt to me like Shahara was the main character. I think it's probably because we start with her. But I felt like we saw a lot more of her than, or maybe
I enjoyed all her stuff with the reveals where she goes into the old
I loved that
archives part of the police station, and she finds the pictures of she finds the evidence that doesn't make any sense, how this guy was alive 100 years ago or whatever. I really enjoyed all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd have to go count, but I feel like there was a part where I felt like Whiteman kind of dropped out of the story toward the end because Shahara and Iris are sort of involved in the same plot, and then their plot gets involved with Hillinghead, and that's all going on for a while, and Whiteman's kind of not involved in that, and then his connects at the end. But I did feel like he was sort of missed. There was a big chunk of the story where he was sort of in the back seat.
Yeah.
Let's see. Anyone else have any favorite moments or characters or anything they wanted to talk about?
I just want to say that the 2 actors that I thought were outstanding to me were the teenager playing Elias Mannix, the teenage Elias Mannix. I thought he was fantastic. Just everything, like the pain turning into anger, and his eyes were so expressive. I thought he was great. And also the woman who played his adoptive mother, who I'm watching it, I'm like, she looks really familiar. And I looked it up. She was the nice little Regency housewife from Sanditon, where she's just sweet and everybody loves her. And then she's just a fucking lunatic in this. The scene where she's, being questioned and she just loses her shit and does that whole, ooh, I said too much, and then bites her tongue off. She was so good. That was such a compelling scene. Those are the 2 people that knocked my socks off.
There's a lot of good act. I just wanted to issue a correction too. I think I'm wrong about Stephen Graham. I said Boardwalk Empire, but I meant Peaky Blinders. Anyway, there was a lot of great acting in this, but I guess 2 things that I didn't love. And they're nitpicks, both of them. One is I know that this is from the comic, but I actually don't know that. So the twist,
it's probably not. There's almost nothing from the comic.
Probably not. The twist that Barber ends up being in on the plot the whole time was both very predictable and it was unnecessary, I thought. And that punch didn't really land because we'd already seen that move several times by this point. The police captain is always involved in every timeline. And so maybe that they did it for symmetry or whatever, but I didn't love that. And I didn't think it was necessary. It just felt a little bit pat, and I kind of rolled my eyes about that.
No. So in the graphic novel, not only is he not in on the plot, there is no plot. That's how different.
Oh, all right.
That's how different they are.
Okay. I couldn't get past the first few pages of the graphic novel, I have to be honest, but I tried. But the other thing that I didn't love, and this is something that actually I thought about Dark as well, the fundamental motivation that drives the whole thing was thin for me. And the fundamental motivation that drives the whole thing is that Elias Mannix didn't feel loved. And I don't know. I just didn't think it was enough. I didn't think it was enough to justify the decisions that he made. I didn't think it was particularly hard to understand. Like, if I could sort of cast myself back to the emotional mess I was at 15, even with a perfectly normal, balanced family life, I can sort of kind of hand wave away okay, I'm going to kill 500,000 people because I'm sad and angry. It's sticking with that choice and seeing that choice as in any way reasonable or justified or anything but batshit crazy 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, that I have a really difficult time with. And I just wish there'd been a little more there.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I thought it made a little bit more sense on my second watch, where there was the implication that this cult had sort of engineered for him to have this miserable foster care experience in order to make him so unhappy. But you really sort of had to like look for it. It didn't come through to me really at all on my first viewing.
The only thing thing about that I had a problem with is that I just don't think that 15-year-olds verbalize it as much as he did. Like, he was very obvious about it. Like, it was very on the nose. Like, nobody from 15-year-olds, it took me about 40 years to really verbalize my anger at my childhood. To really recognize it for what it was. At the time, I was like, yeah, this is normal. Like, 15-year-olds just accept bad treatment from adults as normal, or at least, the ones who are raised to do it. So I just don't think he would really verbalize it and recognize it for what it was at the time. I don't know.
Well, I speak as the father of a boy who's almost 15, and I'm lucky if I can get a grunt out of him at the end of the day. So
exactly.
He was a very articulate young man on screen there.
No, I mean, definitely on first viewing, I think, aside from maybe some of the time travel stuff, my biggest issue was that Shahara would take this kid who was somehow involved in this plot to blow up London and just sort of take him on a field trip to see his mom.
Yeah.
Not in a,
yes.
Yeah.
not handcuffed, not in the back of a car that he can't get out of, but just like that. I'm like, no way in a million years would this ever happen.
Yeah.
And doesn't she already know that that's the motivation? Am I remembering that wrong? Doesn't she already know vaguely that it's something to do with that him, being
rejected,
alienated? Yeah. That sets him off in the first place?
I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But I just thought there should, like, if it was going to be being rejected by his birth mom was going to be the spark that sets him off to detonate the bomb, that needed to be handled way differently. And I was thinking, it might have been, maybe should have been a thing where, like, when he makes the initial decision not to use the detonator, somehow Hassan tells him that his birth mom, expressed an interest in meeting him or something like that. And that's what sort of like,
makes him stop.
Tips the balance for him. And then when it's like, it's not because it's just always, he's never had a relationship with his birth mom. So it's not easy for me to understand why that makes such a big difference. Whereas if he had like built up some sort of false hope and then had the rug pulled out from under him, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to me. But I definitely thought that was one of the least well-handled parts of the plot.
Yeah. And I think it's linked. I would have liked to see some sort of ideology attached to this remaking of the world. I don't, remaking the world so it's nice to me doesn't quite get there for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And you don't really see any downsides to dictatorship. Everything looks pretty cool, actually. Like, I wouldn't mind living in that future.
Well, no, stuff suggested with her brother.
It's like gently repressive.
Oh, yeah.
Maplewood has a brother that she goes to, and he's kind of living off grid.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, is he in a wheelchair?
He's in a wheelchair. Yeah, he says they both have some.
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't remember. So obviously, in the explosion, she was injured, and obviously suffered a spinal injury. Or no,
I think they both have some condition.
Yeah, she says they have the same condition, like genetic condition.
That's right. So obviously, they have a genetic condition. She has this spinal device that she has to charge up that allows her to walk. Her brother's obviously taken the decision to maybe go on the fringes of society. He's living in a more kind of a rundown kind of a place. She goes to him for help with the case. He's kind of a sort of a hacker type, but obviously there's that thing there where she's decided to go all in on, KYAL, Know You Are Loved, and the commander and her brothers on the outside. So we did see a little bit of that, that not everyone is on board with this.
Singapore level repression.
Yeah.
Everything works really well. You're just not allowed to say what you think. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No offense. No offense to anyone from Singapore.
Yeah, they can build a subway line in a day rather than 20 years.
Exactly.
All right.
There's a case to be made. But maybe one other thing, that's another example, and it kind of ties into the ending here. Another example where I think we could have seen more. I felt a little disappointed that there's this intriguing moment which no one seems to have considered, that when Maplewood decides she's going to go back in time to 1890 to start sort of putting some sand in the gears, she's got this spinal implant and she goes through, and she does not seem to have considered, and in fact I hadn't considered either, that when she goes through that portal, the spinal device is gone.
Yeah.
So she finds herself paralyzed, face down in the dirt in 1890. What a terrifying position to be in. She's a naked woman who can't move, who can't walk. She can just drag herself in Whitechapel in 1890. And then, so all we see is her kind of dragging herself out of sight. And then the next thing we know, she's in prison. We don't know how she got there or what she experienced between those moments. And then we don't see her again until we do. And I think that would be another area where I would have liked just a little bit more, because to me, you've just set yourself up for this huge piece of conflict that would be fascinating to see. This is a tense moment. She's helpless in 1890. And they just yada, yada, yada that away too.
Yeah, no, I'll say, yeah, they definitely, I think, could have used at least one more episode to flesh out some stuff. The other thing I just realized, the other thing that I wanted to mention that I really was a huge problem for me was that there's this part where Hillinghead, for no earthly reason that I can divine, decides to carve his name in the brick wall.
Yeah.
And then Shahara in the future goes and looks at it. And I just seems so unmotivated to me. Yeah, it's what the heck? How did this happen? That just drove me crazy.
But then there was a scene where they realized that Maplewood did the same thing, didn't she? She carved her name in the wall. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah.
By that point, it was trendy.
Yeah. Well, at a certain point, I can buy it because they're seeing that other people have done it and they know about time travel. But at the initial point, why the heck does he do it? Hillinghead in the past, who has no idea about time travel or anything else. Mm-hmm. It just seemed very, very contrived.
Mm. Yeah. But is this a good time then to talk about when we do see Iris again?
Yeah, yes. let's just yeah, we can do. Let's get into anything because we're into the closing stages.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, in the last episode, I think it's the last. I can't remember exactly. I think it's the end of the second last episode. You have Iris arriving in 1890, sans spinal implant, which is this horrifying moment, and they're like, "And scene," and you don't know what happens. And then in the next episode, she's in jail and she's trying to convince Hillinghead that she's from the future, et cetera, et cetera. And then we don't see her again. Mm-hmm. She's never referred to again. We don't know what became of this woman in prison or why she's in prison or anything until the very final scene where disaster has been averted. And this is another thing they did that I thought was interesting. Apparently, the people in the future, their memories shift. Mm-hmm. Only they know their memories are shifting, which is fascinating. Anyway, the explosion doesn't happen in 2023. Crisis is averted. And Hassan gets into a taxi or an Uber, I don't know. And it turns out her driver is Maplewood. Mm-hmm. And she makes some remark, maybe you guys who've seen it twice can refresh my memory, but it's something along the lines of, this world is so crazy. and Maplewood says something like,
over.
Yeah. And she's like, you have no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then that's where we
and then she says Shahara, so we know she knows who she is.
And we see the KYAL on the building.
Yeah, I was going to say that I missed that, the KYAL.
Yeah,
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, in the first run through. I only caught it last night when I watched the last episode.
My very strong sense of this, especially from reading interviews with what's his name? Paul, the guy who created the show.
Yeah.
Was that this was he just basically threw this in at the end in case there's a season 2 that this would
I think we read the same stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought he was trolling us. Just kind of no season 2 for you.
I think
you'll be gnawing on this forever.
That butterfly effect thing, that even if you change one small thing, everything else changes. So, we come back and it's normal, but it's not quite normal either. It's not the same as it was. It's not the same 2023 it was in the first episode. Things still have changed.
Well, and it's a pity that they're so committed to not doing future shows, because of course it is ripe that way, as you know, all of us who watched the Arab Spring unfold, or for that matter, a million other examples before it, of the evil, taking that out and the chaos that ensues. Sometimes what comes after is worse.
Yeah.
But so Rory, you read articles or interviews and stuff about the show?
Well, I think I was reading the same kind of thing as you and the creator that you mentioned there, that he said, look, I think if I read the same kind of articles, they hadn't really planned it, but then he kind of threw it in. And there's my question is, where's she been for the last, 150 years or whatever it's been? But I was curious about season 2, if that is there as a season 2, and I have this sort of fixation sometimes with looking up at figures of things, and I did happen to look up at the Netflix top 10 to see how this thing rated, and it was in the top 10 worldwide for 4 weeks. So Netflix, they were famous for paying for anything and letting people run wild, and then they got a bit ruthless and cut stuff back when they couldn't borrow as much money at cheap rates as they used to. But I'd like to think that with the success of this, I mean, it was number 1 between the week of October 23rd and 29th, 58 million hours viewed. I'd like to think that that's a good sign that I'd be all in for another season.
I hope so. I hope you're right, but I don't trust Netflix with anything. Almost every show I was like, this is great, canceled. 1889, a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I would definitely be interested in seeing what else Paul Tomlin could do. I mean, I don't know how much further, this particular story could go without just kind of repeating itself. So I would want to see maybe, if there were to be a season 2, maybe like different time periods and different characters and, some other kind of story or something. Because I feel like these characters all kind of had their arcs and everything.
And I don't dislike the idea of just throwing in a ha-ha sort of little morsel at the end, just to let the viewer's imagination run wild about it, but actually just having that as the end. The interviews that I've read, or the articles that I've read, sounded quite definitive in terms of the no season 2 scenario.
Well, it was only like approved for season for once. It was approved as greenlit as a 1 season thing, and so it would be like unexpected if it were to get a season 2.
And I'm a fan of I'm a fan of the limited series. I'm all for going on a deep dive over 5 or 6 seasons or whatever it is, 60 shows or something like that. But this was nice just to know, okay, there's 8 and that's it. When we're done, it's sometimes I find myself getting caught up in a series, and you watch it and you watch it and watch it, and then every once in a while it's great to go back to something limited, even just watch a 2-hour movie where you've got everything wrapped up in 2 hours. And it was similar with this. It was start to finish, 8 episodes, 8 or 9 hours of my life, whatever it was, and I was happy with that.
Yeah, and I think
it's nice to be left wanting more rather than feeling like they're wringing every dry drop out of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think this did quite well, but it was sort of striking to me that there wasn't a lot of there weren't a lot of YouTube videos or podcasts about it. I mean, there were some, but I was running into a problem I've never run into before prepping for this episode, where there were all these obviously AI generated YouTube videos, which were total garbage. And so I would start, I made a whole playlist of everything I could find, and I'm just trying to listen to it. And I kept having to skip because it's no, this is obviously just AI with AI voice and stuff. And it's stupid. It makes no sense. Actually, one of the things, so I sent you guys, one of the big things I spent a long time, way too long researching, I told you, was trying to figure out Elias Mannix's actual family tree. and it's like really confusing in the show whether the Hayden Harker character is Danny's grandfather or great
we had this in
grandfather.
an email chain offline where you at one stage thought they skipped a generation.
Yeah, because
the guy, the Hayden in 1940s London, you think he is Barber, the police captain in 2023. You think that's his father.
No, it's either.
No.
I think. Wait, where's my notes? I think it's either his grandfather or great grandfather.
So I got those. I watched yesterday after you sent all those emails, so I was sort of looking out for it. Episode 6, Shahara says, Julian Harker was Elias's great grandfather. She says it outright.
Yeah. Well, okay.
God, I
so
hope that's right.
Well, and Sarah says the same thing, but then Julian Harker himself twice says that there's should be two generations between Hayden and Danny.
I took the note that what she says is Danny Barber is Julian's great grandson. That's what she says.
Yeah.
It should be his
Elias
great grandson.
She literally, I wrote it down. I wrote it down, damn it.
No, I understand. No, I'm telling you. So according to that and according to Sarah, he's the great grandson. Danny is the great grandson of Julian Harker, but according to Elias himself, he's the great great grandson of himself.
Which would make Elias the great great grandson of Julian.
No, sorry, I misspoke. Danny is the great great grandson of.
Is everyone following along?
No,
you lost me.
So sorry, it doesn't matter. But
it doesn't.
Yada.
I just bring it up to note that every article I consulted online said a different thing about this, and half of them called the Danny character Jack. And I have no idea where that came from.
Oh, that's weird. Yeah.
But I think it must be an AI, some AI article got
hallucinated,
that wrong,
and then a bunch of other things
replicate. Yeah.
It's funny because and that long email chain, Dave and I then went into bilaterals about it because I was at the airport and I had nothing else to do but, wax eloquent about under 5 mortality rates. Just like blah, 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 blah. But, I think it is also a good example of how the writers themselves did not get too far into the weeds, because I maintain that just on a plausibility level, we got to have at least 3 greats in there. But I don't think they fundamentally cared. Yeah. They're just like, it doesn't matter. So they didn't do the sort of nerdy stuff. And by the way, one of the reasons I was nerding out about it as much as I was is I literally just went through this with one of my books, trying to decide how many greats I needed for this World War I ancestor to be how many great great grandfathers this guy would be for my 29-year-old character. And I sat down and did the math. And I don't think anybody there sat down and did the math.
Yeah. But I think the thinking there is, at this point, you're so deep into this story, you're episode 6, you don't give a damn. Nobody's really going to think about this as deeply as we're doing right now.
Yeah, I think it's entirely possible that A, they didn't really figure it out that carefully. B, I'm confused somehow. Or C, is also possible that the line, Danny's the great-grandson of some posh dead banker, just sounds a lot better than Danny's the great-great-grandson of some posh dead banker. And the line, the child you carry begets a son, then generations are born, then I am born, sounds a lot better than the child you carry begets a son, then there's one more generation, then I am born. So it might have just been for the sake of the lines sounding better, and so what if it disagrees with each other? They disagree with each other.
Well, and also I don't think we can assume the way the relationship is described between Sarah and Barber, it's pretty brief. Yeah. So, I think we don't need to take her 20-year-old memory, 15-year-old memory of this brief sexual relationship she has with Barber as being she's an encyclopedia of knowledge about his genealogical backstory. Yeah. She's got a vague sense that some great something or great something was somebody important, but I didn't personally think we needed to take her all that literally.
Yeah, but then Andrea said, what was it, Harker? Who said the same thing that you said? What you just
in
quoted
episode
somebody.
6, Shahara says Danny Barber is Julian's great-grandson.
Okay, but she just heard that from Sarah, so that doesn't matter. Or I mean, that's not independent.
But she says it when she's presenting the evidence, like to I don't know who. I think maybe the terrorist cops, whatever they're called.
Oh yeah, right.
All right. Well,
this is why I love this kind of thing. I mean, there's been an entire email thread about this, and now several minutes on this. This is fantastic.
So yeah, I think we've spent enough time on that particular topic. Ruairi, anything
you don't
else?
want to talk about infant mortality a little longer?
Ruairi, anything else that you want to bring up before we run out of time here?
No, I mean, it's just, as I said, sometimes my head is confused by time travel. I think Dark is the mother of all of them. And we did 3 podcasts on that show, and I still sometimes
how would you rank this compared to Dark?
Oh, I mean, in terms of its complexity?
No, in terms of your enjoyment of it.
Oh, in terms of my enjoyment, I thought Dark was way above this, to be honest with you. I thought overall it looked better. Everything about it. I enjoyed Dark a lot more than I enjoyed this. Now, that's not to say, I'm not, in a way, you're not comparing like with like. I just thought there was a lot more going on in Dark. We had, I don't know.
Well,
how
there's
many
also
times.
3 seasons of it, so
Yeah, there was 3 seasons. We had how many different time zones? We had multiple characters. There was a lot to go on, and that was part of the fun, trying to keep track of it all with Dark as well. This is, it was highly enjoyable for me, but at the same time, I think I'd be more inclined to go back and rewatch this than Dark.
it's easier to watch.
Yeah, it is an
Much
easier
easier.
watch. Dark, and after sitting through 3 seasons of Dark,
It
I'd
got
be
darker and darker.
yeah, I'd be like, oh wow, I don't know, can I put myself through that again?
Yeah.
But I'd happily watch this again.
Yeah, Erin, were you going to say something about this versus Dark?
I mean, I wasn't. I think there were certain things that I think reminded me of Dark, and I think I mentioned that to you in my original email to you, that there's some things that reminded me. But to me, as Ruairi says, I mean, it's not comparing like with like. I love them both for very different reasons. And Dark is leaning more towards that. It's a complicated puzzle. A really complicated puzzle. And sometimes I'm not in the mood for complicated puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't call this a sort of a Stranger Things bouncy ride bodies, but it's certainly a lot more streamlined, and I find it enjoyable for very different reasons. So I wouldn't sort of be able to compare them cleanly in that way.
Yeah. When I was watching Dark, I literally had to have the timeline, all the who is who in what timeline up every time, because I just kept forgetting who everybody was, and it was so complicated trying to follow along. I mean, it was compelling, and
three-dimensional chess versus checkers.
Exactly that.
Well, I would have, like, after I finished this, I would have said that I liked Dark a lot more, but I went back and listened to all our Dark panels, and it was just really striking how much of the conversation was like, did this happen? I'm not sure. Is this what was going on? I'm not sure. And so there's something sort of frustrating going back and listening to, like, just how much of it was just confusion, how much of the experience of watching that show was just confusion. And I think another thing that this has over Dark is like the different time periods in Dark was mostly the 50s, 80s, and current and present day, which are not like super, super different from each other as opposed to the present day Victorian times in the 40s. So I think that gives this a little bit more variety. So you have like the weird time travel puzzles and stuff, but then you have a little bit more variety to the settings as well.
I also think Dark is just, it had a different mission statement. The pleasure of Dark was the puzzle. That was the frustration of it, but it was also the challenging of your brain to try to figure out what was going on and try to keep up, let alone get ahead and to solve the mystery and figure out what was going on. That frustration was a feature, not a bug. And I don't think that this show had anything like those same aims. This was much more about entertaining and telling a twisty, exciting story. Whereas I don't think that was ever something Dark was going for.
Mm-hmm. I feel like you could maybe just watch this before you watch Dark, and this would be kind of like a good warm up for watching Dark.
If we're speaking of Dark, did anybody else see 1889, which was made by the same people?
Yeah, I loved it.
Yes.
Oh my God, it was so good. So good. I'm so angry that they canceled it.
Yeah.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, so we might do it.
It's so good. So compelling. A lot of the same actors, or at least the main character from Dark, or sorry, not the teenage main character, but the adult main character. You know
Old Jonas.
Yeah, Old Jonas.
Well,
right.
not Old Jonas.
No,
medium Jonas. Middle-aged Jonas. Yeah.
So you guys want to hear about some of the historical inaccuracies in this show?
Sure, I love historical inaccuracies. Oh, I am so in for this. Whee.
Okay. The street lamps in the 1800s scene seem to be electric when they explode, but in those years, almost all street lamps were gas-driven. The boy selling newspapers in the scene from the 1800s yells halfpenny. It's usually pronounced halfpenny or haypenny.
Haypenny, yeah.
Haypenny.
Haypenny.
No, I'm reading. That's what it says. It says halfpenny or haypenny. It is stated that a gentleman's cane in the right hand might imply a limp on the left leg. A cane in those days was a fashion accessory which every gentleman would have. It would not imply a limp, but only that the gentleman was right-handed.
I did think about that when they were talking about it.
Yeah.
I feel smart now.
It is stated that the cane's imprint in the dirt is hexagonal. Antique canes end in a metal or, in the case of expensive ones, bone ferrule. I don't know how to pronounce that. To protect the wood against wear and tear, they make a round, not hexagonal imprint. There were no antique hexagonal ferrules. Bet you didn't know that. Or maybe Erin does. I don't know. Let's see. During one of the segments set in 1941, a police car is seen and heard using a siren. British police cars didn't use sirens until the early 1960s. In 1941, they were equipped with bells. And in a scene set during World War II, Whiteman tells the woman on the phone that he will cold case the matter. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, the earliest recorded use of the term cold case in the context of police investigations was in 1985. So,
okay, I wouldn't advise historical fiction writers to rely solely on OED in this matter. I've caught them a number of times being wrong about that sort of thing. Yes. I recommend Etim Online because they triangulate sources.
What's it called? Etim?
Etim as in etymology. I think it's all one word, Etim Online. And then
so
they have
ETY,
triangulation of...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think I used to
sources.
go to etymology.com. Entomology. It's so hard. It's so easy to make that mistake. Etymology.com to look stuff up because I just love etymology. Love it. But
yeah, so this is a great source. And then newspapers.com, just pick a time bracket and Google it and put it in the search bar.
Actually, you know what? I'm going to ask you about this offline.
You'll find it. You'll find it a lot earlier than anybody claims.
Huh.
So just a fun fact from historical fiction nerds.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say, Erin, about just like the historical fiction aspect of this? Did everything seem pretty on point to you, or did anything really strike a wrong note for you?
No, I didn't. I can't say. I mean, I might on a rewatch. I can't say I picked anything up in particular. No, the hexagonal one is interesting. I think it's funny that they assume that a rich dude couldn't have whatever he wanted on the bottom of his cane. But anyway,
yeah, and that's just according to IMDb. That stuff might be totally wrong for all I know. So you should definitely check that before you put it in your master's thesis or anything like that. I also just want to mention, I think it's, that the Julian Harker character, it seems to me, is very obviously named after Jonathan Harker, who's one of the heroes in Dracula, the Bram Stoker
I
novel,
wondered
Dracula.
about that.
Yeah.
And then there's a reference to the Deutsch particle, which I think is very obviously a reference to the Oxford physicist David Deutsch, who was also name-checked in Avengers Endgame. Tony Stark references the Deutsch proposition while discussing time travel with Scott Lang and the other Avengers. So
interesting.
All right, cool. So we're pretty much out of time. Does anyone have any other big topics that they wanted to discuss?
I just have a question about like British movies, stories about post-apocalyptic Britain, because this reminded me, not so much reminded me, but it's similar to like Children of Men, V for Vendetta. This show from the 90s called Cold Lazarus. All of them take place in Britain in some post-apocalyptic dictatorial under some dictatorial regime. Several of them involving either like, a plague that reordered society or a war that reordered society. I'm trying to think of like similar ones set in the US, and all I can think of is like 12 Monkeys. Sorry, is this just me going off on a tangent?
No, I'm trying to think of. I think anything because I like post-apocalyptic stuff.
Are you saying, Andrew, you're wondering if there's something specifically British about that idea? Yeah,
specifically British about it, because all those I named were British. The only thing I can think of set in the US is 12 Monkeys.
Only thing I can think of is like post-zombie stuff. Really, I can't think of anything.
Zombie apocalypse.
There's lots of zombie stuff.
Off the top of my head?
What's the name of the one where the Nazis won World War II?
Oh,
Man in the High Castle.
Man in the High Castle.
Yes, Man in the High Castle. Does that count?
Yeah.
And I think if to the degree we can explain a particular British affection for it, the First and Second World War might speak a little bit to the idea of having reflected deeply on what it would mean for Britain
for that to win.
For something like that to happen. One thing I did want to mention, Dave, I don't know if you've been reading any of the year-end roundups of best ofs of this year, but most of my favorite publications cited The Last of Us as some of the best television of the year. And they all, down to the last one, specifically mentioned the Frank and Bill episode as the highlight of the series. So it's just to call back to a previous panel where we talked about that. And I think some of us also felt that was the highlight. So that was gratifying to see that they had that success.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't actually watched it yet. I've been waiting for free time to binge it because I need all
Episode
the emotional.
Episode 3, Andrea.
I know. I do know what you're talking about because I know the game.
It's very good.
But I've been waiting because I need like the emotional energy to conserve my emotional energy to get through it because it's so wrenching. So I'm looking forward to watching that. So, well, as much as I'm looking forward to anything that is going to depress the shit out of me.
All right, cool. So why don't we get into some final thoughts? So, Ruairi, final thoughts on watching Bodies.
If you like time travel and you don't like thinking too much about it,
we've done the thinking for you.
If you like that kind of thing, you can think about this, but you can also let it kind of wash over you, and that's what I enjoyed about it. And I think this is designed to be a more enjoyable, entertaining program than some of the harder stuff like Dark. And for people that might be put off by it, as I said, we talked about how it teaches you to watch it, stick with it, and you'll have a great time. And I would love to see season 2. I don't know how they would do it, but I would love to see it. So stick with it and go for it is all I'd say.
Or if you like thinking a lot about whether Hayden Harker was the grandfather or great-grandfather.
Or great-great-grandfather.
Exactly.
Andrea, final thoughts.
Well, if you're like me into science fiction and also detective stories, this is the show for you. It hit every point I wanted it to. It met every expectation I had for it. It was in every way possible, story-wise, character-wise, and also just, having worked in television for years, how the look of it, the production design, the storytelling devices, everything worked on a really high level for me. So, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Yeah, I mean, I found it really, really engrossing. I think on first watch, I thought it was, really entertaining, but maybe, it didn't make as much sense as I wanted it to. I liked it a lot more second time around. Or, I mean, I thought it made, I thought a lot of my objections actually were addressed in a way that I didn't really notice until the second viewing. So I have a pretty positive feeling about it now. I mean, it's not groundbreaking particularly. I mean, if you've watched a lot of time travel stories, I think you've pretty much seen most of this stuff before, but it is really, like I said, I watched the whole thing in one day and, just couldn't stop. So, I mean, if you're looking for something that's going to really grab your attention like that, I would definitely recommend it on that basis. But so how about Erin? Final thought on Bodies.
Yeah, I just think it's really enjoyable. And I think, this is a great example of where the gimmick, which is time travel, and, we actually don't see that much time travel. It's not like people are running around doing all this time traveling.
Yeah.
We don't even see it at all until the end. It's implied that this is the mechanism by which the plot is unfolding. And at no point does it get in the way. And I think that's refreshing. We don't get so hung up on the gimmick that we forget to tell the story. The gimmick is just, as I mentioned before, I think it's just whatever metaphor you want to use, the engine, the scaffolding, to facilitate what is a good detective yarn. It's a good detective yarn with sprinkles, as opposed to, something that's like a hardcore science fiction story with sprinkles of detectives on top. And that's what I like about it is that balance, that it's largely about normal detectives doing normal things in their timelines. It's refreshing to sort of see what's similar and what's different in their processes, especially if you kind of like geeking out on police procedurals a bit. And that spec fic element is just sprinkles. And I love that. So if that sounds like it appeals, check it out.
Yeah. And it definitely made me curious to see what else, to see what comes next from Paul Tomlin, because, he does, I thought the characters and the mood and everything so well. And I'd be curious to see what he does with a non-time travel story, because, the time travel stories are always going to have, as Rory knows all too well, going to have some stuff that it's never going to seem like it totally makes sense. So I'd be curious to see some other genre, what he's capable of. But yeah, definitely recommend it. Super fun, So everyone check it out. All right, but why don't we wrap things up there? So we've been speaking with Erin Lindsey, Andrea Kail, and Ruairi Carroll. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Erin Lindsey, Andrea Kail, and Ruairi Carroll for joining us on the show. This episode of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy was made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.